Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we, well, deep dive into fascinating topics. Today we're going to be exploring biohacking, all inspired by a recent YouTube video featuring Farb Nivi.
Farb Nivi, yeah, he is an interesting guy. He's been biohacking for over 20 years now
Yeah.
due to some personal health challenges he's faced.
It sounds like he's gone pretty deep into it.
Oh, yeah. And he's now really embracing these cutting-edge technologies, you know, to optimize his health. He's really striving for longevity.
Yeah.
You can really see the results, too. I mean, just watching him in this video, you could tell that he's put a lot of work into this. He's got this vitality that really draws you in.
I definitely noticed that too. So our mission today is to take what Farb's learned over these 2 decades and try to distill it down for you. We want to get you up to speed on some of these biohacking ideas, give you that shortcut.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay, let's start with how Farb first got into all this.
Well, like I said, he's had some serious health problems. It actually started back in college when he had some really bad digestive issues. Like he was so sick he could barely eat or sleep.
Wow, that's awful.
And it was so bad that conventional medicine couldn't really help him. He had to start looking for answers on his own, which is how he found macrobiotics online. It's this diet, this way of eating, that's all about whole foods and fermented foods.
It's interesting you mentioned that because it sounds kind of similar to Brian Johnson's blueprint diet that we've talked about before.
Yeah, there are definitely some similarities. And the amazing thing is, Farb actually managed to completely recover just by changing his diet.
That's impressive.
It really is. But unfortunately, that wasn't the end of his health struggles. He was hit by a car later on, and it left him with some pretty serious injuries. He couldn't even walk properly for a while.
Oof, another tough break.
Yeah, it was. But again, instead of just accepting the limitations, he started exploring alternative approaches, like peptide therapy and hormone therapy. He really pushed himself with intensive training, too.
He seems like a really determined guy.
He is. And, he eventually regained his mobility. He was even doing things like climbing rope ladders using just his hands. Pretty incredible recovery.
That's amazing. It sounds like he's really faced some major health obstacles.
He has. And then when he was in his early 40s, he started losing his hearing. It was a genetic thing.
So not another accident, but still a huge challenge.
Right. And most people would have just accepted him. But not Farb. He did his research, found a top surgeon, and had a procedure to replace the bones in his ears with titanium.
Titanium ear bones. That sounds intense.
It is. And for him, it was life-changing. You see, Farb has been a huge music fan his whole life. Music has always been a big part of who he is. And suddenly, he was losing the ability to hear it.
I can't even imagine.
So you can imagine how emotional it was for him when he woke up from surgery and could hear again. He said he could even hear the faintest whispers. It must have been incredible.
That gives me chills. Okay, so now we get to the weight gain, right? Which seems a bit unexpected given his history.
Yeah, so Farb has always been pretty lean, in great shape. But recently, he started gaining weight. It's what led him to explore gene therapy, which is, pretty out there.
Gene therapy, that's some next level stuff. And he actually went to Honduras for it.
Yeah, he went to a clinic in Honduras that specializes in these experimental treatments. And what they did was inject these genetically modified plasmids directly into his shoulder.
Okay, hold on. Let's break that down a little. What exactly are plasmids?
So plasmids are basically little loops of DNA. They're often found in bacteria. And what scientists have figured out how to do is genetically modify these plasmids so that they can be used for therapy.
So they're injecting these little pieces of DNA into his body. What are they supposed to do?
Well, the problem with plasmids is that they break down pretty quickly in the body. They only last for a few hours, which isn't really long enough to have a lasting effect.
So how do they get around that?
They've developed this new technology called mini circle technology that basically allows them to create these streamlined versions of plasmids that are way more stable.
And that means?
That means they can last for years instead of hours.
Years. Wow. So these mini circles, what are they actually doing in his body?
They're acting as these tiny little factories inside his cells. They basically hijack the cell's machinery to produce specific proteins. In Farb's case, the plasmids are designed to produce a protein called fostatin.
Fostatin.
Yeah, fostatin. And fostatin basically binds to myostatin.
And myostatin is, sorry, I'm not familiar with all these technical terms.
No worries. Myostatin is a protein that our bodies naturally produce, and it basically acts as a brake on muscle growth. It limits how much muscle we can build. So fostatin, by binding to myostatin, takes the brake off, allowing for more muscle growth.
So it's like this muscle building hack.
Exactly. And Farb even said that he gained muscle mass even when he couldn't work out because he had a broken finger.
Yeah.
So there's definitely some anecdotal evidence to support it.
And for the average person, what does that mean? Like, how could this be beneficial?
Well, think about it. It could make it easier to build muscle, which is great for overall health and strength. But it could also help combat sarcopenia, which is the age-related muscle loss that a lot of people experience.
So it's not just about aesthetics, it's about preserving function as we age.
Exactly. And Farb even called it Captain America tech.
I love that. Okay, but it sounds like the gene therapy wasn't just about muscle. He mentioned something about his epigenetic age, too.
Right. So Farb's chronological age is 47. But after the gene therapy, his epigenetic age was measured at 30,
Wait, so he's biologically 17 years younger.
according to this specific biological marker. Yeah.
Okay, so now I definitely need you to explain epigenetics. What does that even mean?
It's basically the study of how our genes are expressed. Our DNA is like the blueprint, but epigenetics is like the instruction manual that tells those genes what to do.
So we might have a gene for something, but that doesn't mean it'll actually be expressed.
Right. Epigenetics determines whether a gene is turned on or off.
And what's fascinating is that these epigenetic changes can actually be passed down to future generations.
Exactly. So for instance, if your grandparents experienced trauma or hardship, those experiences could potentially affect your health today through epigenetic modifications. It's like this idea of generational trauma.
But that also means we have the power to make positive changes that could benefit our children and grandchildren.
Exactly. And some of the biggest things that influence our epigenetics are things like sleep, diet, and exercise. All the basic stuff we always hear about.
It's amazing to think that those simple things can have such a profound impact at the molecular level.
And Farb even talked about how epigenetics can influence how we age visibly. In India, they had this concept called tage, which is like this inner radiance or shine that people have. And he believes that a healthier epigenetic profile can contribute to that.
So it's not just about feeling younger, it's about looking younger too.
It seems so. And he also brought up this idea that the body keeps score. Like all of our choices throughout life, good or bad, they leave a mark on our epigenetics.
I like that. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about mobility. Farb talked a lot about the importance of mobility, and it's not just about being flexible, right?
No, it goes deeper than that. He was really emphasizing the role of fascia, which is that connective tissue that surrounds all our muscles and organs. It's like that silvery skin you see when you're preparing raw chicken.
Oh yeah, I know what you mean.
And what happens is, as we age, or even from things like too much weightlifting, the fascia can become less flexible and sticky. It starts to restrict our movement.
So that's why some people can't fully lift their arms overhead, or why they develop a hunched posture?
Exactly. And Farb actually shared this simple trick to improve posture. You just put your hands on your chest with your elbows pointing down, helps to open up the shoulders.
I'm definitely going to try that. So if we don't actively work on our mobility, we're going to lose it. It's that use it or lose it principle.
Exactly. And Farb used the example of being able to do a deep squat with a straight back. It's a basic movement, but a lot of people can't do it, even when they're relatively young. And that's a sign that their mobility is declining.
Okay, now let's talk about yoga and PDTR. Farb's got some interesting perspectives on those.
He does. So he actually sees yoga as more than just stretching. He described it as an internal massage for the organs.
Internal massage. How does that work?
He explained that the movements in yoga create cycles of compression and decompression that help to keep the organs healthy. And beyond the physical benefits, he talked about the neurological benefits too, like how yoga can help to calm the mind and maybe even improve skin health.
And then there's PDTR. He called it voodoo magic.
He did. Proprioceptive deep tendon reflex. It's a technique that was developed by an orthopedic surgeon, and it works by tapping into the nervous system's feedback loops.
Okay, let's back up. What's proprioception?
It's basically your body's awareness of where it is in space. And it also involves your senses of pain, touch, heat, and cold. A lot of that sensory information is actually located in the fascia.
So how does PDTR work on that?
The idea is that when we experience trauma, whether it's physical or emotional, our body kind of creates a memory of that trauma. And that memory can manifest as limitations in our movement. So for example, after Farb's car accident, he couldn't bend over properly. He thought his hamstrings were just tight. But when he saw a PDTR practitioner, they explained that his body was subconsciously tightening those muscles as a protective mechanism because it was afraid of re-injuring itself.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so PDTR uses these very specific, often light touches or manipulations to basically reset that stored memory in the nervous system. And Farb said that after a session, he could suddenly touch his toes again. He believes that this type of work with the nervous system is connected to some of the benefits of yoga too.
Now, obviously, some people are going to be skeptical of all this, especially the gene therapy and PDTR.
Right. And Farb acknowledges that.
Hmm.
But he makes a distinction between science and what he calls scientism.
Scientism.
Yeah, he uses that term to describe this rigid belief in science to the point where people dismiss anything that hasn't been scientifically proven. But he also points out that even within the scientific community, there are issues with studies not being reproducible or even data being manipulated. He actually brought up the blue zones and how some of those claims have been debunked.
So where does he stand then? Is he saying we shouldn't trust science?
No, not at all. He's just saying that we need to be critical of the research and not discount personal experience. He uses this term practical truth, which basically means letting your own experiences and results guide your decisions about what works for you.
I like that. It's about finding what works for you, not just blindly following what the studies say.
Right. And he also made the point that you can find scientific backing for pretty much any health theory out there, so it's not always easy to know what to believe.
So how do we navigate that?
Farb believes that it's important to look at the mechanisms of action. Like, how does something actually work at a biological level? He gave the example of sauna use and how it leads to the production of heat shock proteins, which help to repair DNA and proteins. That's a pretty well understood mechanism, whereas with something like cold shock therapy, the mechanisms aren't as clear yet.
So it's about understanding the why, not just the what.
Exactly. And he also acknowledged that science can't explain everything about the body. There's still a lot we don't know.
Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, Ozempic, and all these other weight loss drugs that everyone's talking about.
Farb talked about those too. So Ozempic and the class of drugs it belongs to, called GLP-1 agonists, work by slowing down how fast food moves to your gut. This makes you feel full longer and reduces your appetite overall.
Okay, but there are other drugs out there now too, right?
Yes. There's tirzepatide, which goes by the brand names Mounjaro and Zepbound, and it actually has two mechanisms of action. And then there's retatrutide, which is still experimental, but it has three mechanisms of action. So it seems like the effectiveness of these drugs is only going to increase.
It's interesting that he's bringing up these medications given his focus on natural approaches.
Right. But he also pointed out that the benefits of these drugs may go beyond just weight loss. They might improve metabolic health and potentially even increase lifespan.
So they're not just a quick fix, they could have long-term benefits.
It seems so. He actually experimented with retatrutide himself and said that it completely shut down his appetite. But he also talked about how fostatin, the protein from the gene therapy, is great for maintaining muscle mass. So it's like different tools for different goals.
So if you're trying to lose weight but also maintain muscle, you might consider combining approaches.
That's his thinking, yeah. And speaking of his forward-thinking approach, did you know that Farb actually invests in health tech companies?
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, he works with Naval at Rant Capital. And he's personally invested in companies like MiniCircle, the gene therapy company we talked about.
So he's putting his money where his mouth is.
He is. And he mentioned other investments, too, in things like medical diagnostics and personalized therapies. There's this one company he's particularly excited about that's developing a genetic test, which will then be used to create a personalized IV cocktail therapy tailored to your specific needs.
Wow. That's pretty futuristic.
It is. And he explained that a lot of the money that's invested in these companies goes towards research and development, which is really important for advancing these technologies. And he's especially excited about the future of MiniCircle technology. He thinks it has the potential to be used for things like cognitive enhancement and even treating diseases like HIV.
So it's not just about longevity, it's about improving quality of life in all sorts of ways.
Right. Now, I know we have a lot of listeners who are interested in gut health, and Farb's story is really relevant here.
He's got quite a gut health journey himself.
He does.
Yeah.
He actually had some really severe gut issues in college. Like, he could barely digest anything without getting sick.
It sounds similar to his digestive problems earlier, but this was later.
Yeah, this was later. And it's becoming more and more common.
It seems like everyone's talking about gut health these days.
Yeah, and a lot of people are going vegan or gluten-free or dairy-free.
I've noticed that too. A lot of people are saying those diets cleared up their skin or reduced bloating.
Right. And Farb acknowledges that those diets can be helpful. But he thinks a lot of the benefit comes from simply eliminating processed foods.
So it's not necessarily about cutting out specific food groups, it's about eating more whole foods.
Exactly. And he really emphasizes the importance of the gut microbiome, the trillions of bacteria that live in our digestive tract.
Yeah, the microbiome. We've heard that term a lot lately.
And it's important. It plays a huge role in our overall health. It's involved in everything from digesting food to producing neurotransmitters that affect our mood.
So it's not just about digestion, it's about our mental health too.
Exactly. And Farb actually described it as this war between good and bad bacteria in the gut. And things like antibiotics can really disrupt that balance.
So how do we make sure the good bacteria win?
Well, the macrobiotic diet that Farb followed focuses on eating fermented foods. Things like unpasteurized miso, sauerkraut, homemade pickles. Those are all full of beneficial bacteria.
And he also talked about elimination diets, right?
He did. He thinks those can be helpful for figuring out which foods are causing problems, whether it's vegan, gluten-free, even carnivore. By eliminating certain foods, you can often give your gut a chance to heal.
Interesting.
Yeah. And he actually spent 2 years on this super strict, mostly vegan diet, cooking everything from scratch. And he eventually managed to heal his gut to the point where he could even tolerate dairy again.
So he basically reversed his lactose intolerance.
It seems so. And his philosophy on gut health is that health is strength. He believes that the gut needs to be exercised, just like our muscles. And that means consistently eating healthy foods.
So it's a long game, not a quick fix.
Right. And he emphasized that it takes a lot of dedication, like years of cooking from scratch. But he also talked about how having a supportive community can make a big difference. And he also acknowledged the growing awareness and use of probiotics, which can be helpful for restoring the balance of bacteria in the gut.
Now, on a lighter note, Farb shared his never eat list, and some of it was pretty surprising.
Oh, yeah. So first of all, he never drinks water out of plastic bottles. He says it tastes weird, and he's concerned about chemicals leaching into the water.
Okay, that one's not too out there.
Right. And he also never microwaves or cooks food in plastic containers for the same reason. And he avoids any processed foods that taste plastic-like. His rule of thumb is to stick to real food as much as possible.
Makes sense. But he's got some opinions on meat too, right?
Oh, yeah. So he's a big believer in moderation, even with healthy foods. He thinks we should limit our meat consumption because he believes that if it's not properly digested, it can rot in the gut.
Wow. Strong words.
Yeah. And he also stresses the importance of sourcing clean meat, meaning meat from animals that were raised in healthy conditions.
So quality over quantity.
Right. And what's really interesting is that he actually eats very little protein, like only 50 to 100 grams per day.
That's really low, especially for someone who's so focused on health and longevity.
I know, right? But he believes that our bodies are really efficient at reusing protein, so we don't need as much as we think we do.
Interesting. And I'm guessing he's not a fan of protein powders or protein bars then.
He is not. He calls them not real food and says they're too processed. He also avoids prepping his meals too far in advance because he believes there's a life force in fresh food that diminishes over time.
That's a new one.
And on a more positive note, he's a fan of spicy foods like chilies. He thinks they might have hormetic effects, meaning they stress the body in a good way. And he loves organ meats, calling them super healthy. He even compared us to lions who go for the organ meat first when they make a kill.
That's a pretty vivid image.
It is. Okay, last but not least, let's talk about longevity. Because it's pretty clear that Farb's ultimate goal is to live as long as possible. He even joked about having a breakfast date with Brian Johnson in the year 2324.
That's pretty far out.
It is. And he was pretty serious when he said that he doesn't ever want to die. He doesn't understand why anyone would choose to be dead at a certain age if they're still feeling good. And he believes that by actively working to prevent aging, we can avoid a lot of the suffering that comes with it.
That's a bold statement.
It is. And he also brought up Aubrey de Grey, who's this scientist who believes that we can cure aging by focusing on repairing cellular damage. He compares it to maintaining a car. If you take care of it, it can run for a very long time.
So it's about prevention and maintenance.
Exactly.
Okay, so to recap, we covered a lot today. We talked about Farb's own biohacking journey, from overcoming serious health challenges to embracing cutting-edge technologies like gene therapy. We explored the concepts of epigenetics and how our lifestyle choices can influence our health and even the health of future generations. We discussed the importance of mobility and fascia and learned about alternative therapies like PDTR.
And we delved into the complexities of scientific research and how to navigate the ever-changing world of health information. We talked about new weight loss drugs and the potential they have to not only help people lose weight, but also improve their metabolic health and maybe even increase their lifespan. And we also got a deep dive into Farb's unique approach to gut health and nutrition, learning about his never eat list and his belief in the power of real food.
It's been a fascinating journey through the world of biohacking. So, what are your takeaways? What resonated with you the most? What are you going to explore further? And what risks of doing nothing are you willing to accept?
Think about it. In a world where our understanding of biology and the technology to manipulate it are rapidly advancing, what does it really mean to take control of your health? It's a question worth pondering. And hopefully this deep dive has given you some food for thought.
So, keep learning, keep experimenting, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible, because the future of health is in our hands.
Absolutely. Until next time.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
We'll see you soon.